So, 16th of April, what's been happening in the news and why have I not been posting for such a long time? Well, until recently, there's not been a great deal actually to report, but today I think it's worth making a few comments on some of the newspaper headlines and the news media headlines, which have hit our screens just in the last day or so. Now, probably one of the most important ones, and I think those of you who support independence probably have been watching this fairly closely for the last few days, is recent polling which shows, first of all, that support for independence has reached a whopping 56%, which is remarkably good. I mean, we can't take away from the fact that that is an amazing result, that support for independence continues to rise, despite the support for the SNP apparently still falling. This is a rather ironic situation, considering the fact that the SNP is nominally a pro-independence party and its entire raison d'etre, its reason for existence, is to get independence. And yet so far we haven't heard anything from the SNP about independence at all. But we'll return to that in a moment. The other thing that has occurred recently on the back of this poll, that support for independence has reached 56%, is that further polling has been interpreted by Professor Sir John Curtice, the well-known psephologist or pollster, who's made a prediction about the result for the Holyrood election in 2026 based on the current polling results. Now, I'm emphasising the word based on the current polling position because Curtice's predictions, which I'll come to in a moment, are quite astounding. First of all, arithmetically, and that's just looking at the arithmetic involved in the voting intentions. And remember, this is about percentages here. According to Professor Curtice, the SNP and other pro-independence parties are on course to win what's known as an outright majority. That means winning a massive proportion of the seats in Holyrood, to the exclusion of all the other parties. In other words, obtaining enough seats to have a majority which none of the other pro-union parties can counter, even if they combine to try and resist it. Now, this sounds fantastic on paper, and when I first saw this, I thought, great, that's wonderful news. We're going to have a pro-independence majority in 2026, according to Professor Curtice. But there are a number of things which would need to happen in order for this to actually come to pass. And the things that are neglected from Professor Curtice's analysis are things like how many candidates each party stands. Now, that we know that the support for the SNP has actually dropped a bit, and they are likely to lose perhaps a handful of seats, maybe up to 10 seats in the next the Holyrood general elections. Now, given the fact that they're projected to lose seats, how come we're going to end up with a pro-independence majority, and an outright majority at that? Well, the peculiar arithmetic that's involved in the bizarre voting system that's been forced upon Scotland by Westminster means that the d'Hondt calculation, which is the way that they calculate how many list seats, these are the second vote seats, how many of those seats are allocated to each party, is not necessarily based on how popular the candidate is, or even who the candidate is, but they're based entirely on how many votes were cast by all the parties. And if you win a lot of seats in the first past the post, that's the first vote, then you cannot win as many seats on the list. The way the arithmetic works is it basically divides your chances of winning a seat in the second part of the election process. And the bizarre arithmetic means that despite the SNP losing seats in the first vote, it's more likely to pick up seats in the second ballot, in the actual list seat allocation. And that's because the SNP is not the only party to have lost support, because the Labour Party has hemorrhaged support recently, and so have the Tories. Both of the primary parties of the United Kingdom, i.e. England, seem to be tanking in the Scottish polls. Labour support has basically evaporated since the last Westminster general election, based on the fact that Sir Keir Starmer has proved to be more Tory than the Tories themselves, and has cut everybody's benefits, in direct contradiction to exactly what he was promising before the election, where he said he would protect benefits and even increase them, and would prevent places like Grangemouth from closing. All of the things that the Labour Party promised before they were elected, they have now completely reversed and actually gone ahead and trash the place. So Labour is pretty much spent force in Scotland, and those Labour supporters who traditionally will vote Labour at every election, no matter what they do, well, they're not going to change very much. But any of us who thought that Labour might have been a good idea at the general election were very quickly disappointed. However, what that's left in Scotland is a very strange set of arithmetical problems, because with support for the two primary unionist parties basically in the teens now, and they're pretty much about the same level, about 13% of the voters polled plan to vote for these two unionist parties. And also the Liberal Democrats, their vote has risen slightly. So all three of the unionist parties are around about between 10 and 15%, each of them. So they have a very low vote share. The SNP is a whopping 55%, I think, if I looked last time. Somebody will probably correct me, but the SNP had a very large share of the votes. According to Professor Curtice, the Greens would also increase their seat numbers to something like 13. And not only the Greens, but Alba would also win 7 seats. Now that's terrific if both the Greens and Alba have put up enough candidates in order to win those 7 seats. And this is where the problem lies, because Curtice's prediction entirely relies on these parties putting up enough candidates to get somebody elected in the list. And that means that all of these parties have to produce enough candidates in order to provide the choice necessary for them to win the seats that he's predicting. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong in the next 12 months that might derail that. So despite the fact that, according to the arithmetic at least, and it's very complicated to work out, I'm not even going to attempt to explain it to you because it's so bizarre, the result of the SNP losing a little bit of its vote share and the complete collapse of the unionist vote, ironically the SNP will pick up some more seats, but also bizarrely the Greens will pick up a lot more seats, and Alba for the first time will get 7 seats according to Professor Curtice. But again, it all is based on something which doesn't exist yet. The number of candidates needs to be enough that those votes will be, those seats will be allocated to those candidates. So a lot of things would need to happen in order for this prediction to come true. And there are a lot of things that could derail it. Which brings me to the next part of this show. Now, you may have noticed that the Supreme Court in England, that's the UK Supreme Court to you and I, the one that said that Scotland and its Parliament can't hold another independence referendum. Remember that one? Well, anyway, they have now come in and waded into the argument about what the definition of a woman is. Now, you would think this is glaringly obvious and nobody needs to have it pointed out to them what a woman is, but you'd be wrong, because according to the SNP's government and all of the things that they have been doing with the Gender Recognition Reform Act, according to them at least, a definition of a woman can include trans women, men who have transgendered to women, and they can now be accepted as women and allowed into women-only spaces. Now, according to the UK Supreme Court, they have now jumped into this and said, no, that's not the case. The Supreme Court has now ruled that across the UK, the definition of a woman is a biological female. That is a human being who is biologically born a woman. And nothing else comes into it. Trans men, trans women, no, doesn't happen. They have decided that to clarify this, across the UK, for all legal and other purposes, a woman is defined as a biological female. Now that completely undermines all of the work the SNP did with its Gender Recognition Reform Act. And since the UK is largely the arbiter of whatever happens in the United Kingdom, and its Supreme Court reigns supreme, especially over Holyrood it seems, then it seems that the SNP's work on this issue and all of the contentious and argumentative work that was done to try and make this happen has now simply been undone by the United Kingdom government. And well, for the first time in a long time, I'm actually going to say this, I think the UK got something largely right. Whilst I support trans women, trans men, people of no gender, I think it's important that the definition of a woman needs to stay as a biological female, because women have been largely relegated to some kind of second-class citizens by the Scottish Government's meddling in this area. And it's angered over 50% of the Scottish population, who've turned on the SNPs. You're talking rubbish. You know, women are women, men are men. If men transition to be a woman, he doesn't make them a woman automatically. It maybe gives them some rights, and they can be recognised as women. They can wear women's clothes, they can dress as women, they can alter their bodies to look like women, but it doesn't alter the sex that we're born with. Now, I know this is contentious, and I might seem like an old fuddy-duddy to you in saying this, but it seems obvious to me that no matter what rights you give to people who are transsexual, to put it in its old phraseology, but who move from one sex to another and want to be defined that way, I don't have a problem with that, and I don't have a problem with transgender people at all. In fact, I'm happy for them to have the same rights as other human beings. But I think women cannot be relegated to second class. I think it's very important that we accept the fact that biological sex is a thing. It can't be wished away. However much men might want to do that, and however much a trans woman might want to wish away the fact that she was born in a male body, we can't wish that away. However, the rights need to remain for everybody in equal measure, but there are certain safety aspects to this which can't be overlooked. But I think it's strange that it's taken the UK Supreme Court to jump into this and make a definitive ruling on it, because I wasn't really expecting them to do that. And in many cases, the shall we say, the more progressive side of British and Scottish politics would still hold that trans rights, LGBT rights, are equal to everybody else's rights, and largely they are. But women need to feel safe, girls need to feel safe, and they don't feel safe when there are trans men inside their safe spaces. They can't feel safe because they don't know who these people are. They don't know who they are, what they are. They don't know why they're there, and they will naturally feel threatened. Even if there's no threat, but they're bound to feel threatened because they don't know who this person is. They don't know how they got into this, single-sex space in the first place, and they don't feel comfortable in that single-sex space anymore. They don't feel safe in it, and I think that is something which is forgotten about here. Everybody's entitled to feel safe. Everyone, transgender, male or female, doesn't matter. Everybody should have the right to be safe, whatever they're doing, especially in public spaces which are reserved for women or men, for that matter, okay? Anyway, I just thought it was strange that it was the UK Supreme Court that jumped in with this, and it has undermined the SNP's position on this to some extent and made them look foolish, and that's not really that surprising, I don't think, given the amount of consternation and anger this has caused across Scotland, especially among the female population, but also among men as well, who see this as an unnecessary step. Anyway, let's move on from that. Now, based on what I said earlier on about the predictions made by Professor Curtice about the 2026 independence referendum, the 2026 election, it's not going to affect independence at all, because none of the nominally pro-independence parties have yet said how the process for gaining independence is going to happen, and none of them has agreed with any of the others on a common approach to this. And I think when it comes to voting for parties in Holyrood, you either are voting for a party because it's a party, or you're voting for independence. Now, if you're voting for independence, these parties do not look very convincing yet. It has to be said that, so far at least, Alba hasn't come out with a plan either. The SNP is basically shrugging off the whole issue of independence and trying to avoid talking about it at all costs. And I've heard various anecdotal evidence from various journalists who've attempted to get the SNP to come online or to come on air and actually talk about the issue of how the SNP plans to achieve independence, to no avail. Even though some of the initial attempts to get people involved or to get spokespersons from the SNP to come on air and be quoted. Initially, some of these invitations were accepted, only then, weeks later, to be countermanded by the private secretaries of some of the politicians who were invited and had originally agreed to come on and actually talk about it. Somehow or other, their private secretaries or their functionaries have said, oh, no, we can't talk about that, that's not going to happen, end of story, and have shut down any further conversation. And that's very strange. Why should the Party of Independence or parties of independence shut down any journalist who asks for an interview on the topic of independence when these parties say that that is their raison d'etre, their reason for existence is to gain independence? I began to talk about Alba a minute ago, and my colleague Norrie Hunter at Caledon Radio has got Kenny McCaskill coming on his programme on Thursday afternoon on his radio broadcast, his podcast, to talk about exactly that. Now, it was a bit of a struggle to get Mr. McCaskill to agree to this, but Norrie persisted, and Kenny has agreed to come on to talk about Alba's position on independence, specifically as a part of Norrie Hunter's show. Now, that shows, I think, from Mr. McCaskill, a level of courage, because there are very few pro-independence politicians who are elected who have the courage to step forward and actually talk about what their party proposes as a process for achieving independence. And I'll be interested to see what Mr. McCaskill has to say to Norrie on Thursday. And probably Norrie and I will be talking about that a lot on Friday morning's Hod My Jacket programme, which will be live again at 9:30 this coming Friday. So we don't yet know what Alba's position is on how to gain independence. We certainly don't know anything about anything to do with independence from the Greens, because the Greens appear, at the moment at least, to be not the slightest bit interested in mentioning independence before the next general election. They obviously feel it's some kind of poisoned chalice, and if they make some kind of statement, they will lose votes and not get elected. And this is a permanent problem with Holyrood, because it's a British Parliament set up and run as a subsidiary of the British Parliament. It attracts career politicians who want a safe sinecure, a job for life basically, or at least a job for 5 years that pays £80,000 to £90,000 a year, and who among us can claim to be earning that amount of money for that type of job at the moment? Not many, I'm sure. So we know that the SNP is very reluctant to reveal anything about their attitude to independence, and that is deeply suspicious coming from the party which was founded specifically to do just that. If you compare the actions and the statements of John Swinney, for example, with those of his earlier predecessor, Alex Salmond did a whole lot of things while we were still in the Union, well before the independence referendum in 2014. He renamed the Scottish Assembly, as it was in Edinburgh, as the Scottish Parliament. It no longer became the Scottish Executive or the Scottish Assembly, it became the Scottish Parliament. And that was something which Mr. Salmond did, which was bold. He also went ahead and built the Queen's Ferry crossing. He allocated the funding. He made sure it was built. He made sure it was built on time, and it came in under budget. That was not something he asked permission from the United Kingdom to do. In fact, there were many things that Alex Salmond did while he was First Minister which the United Kingdom did not sanction at all. And he persisted to the point where he actually got the UK to agree to hold a referendum on Scottish independence, despite the fact that it was only advisory, and it was most likely, even if we won it, that it would be declared null and void because not enough people voted, or there's some threshold we didn't meet. They would find some excuse. Even if we'd got 55% of the vote in favour of leaving the United Kingdom, I'm pretty sure they would have found a way of undermining that and saying, no, we're not going to do anything about it because it's only advisory, and we've taken the advice and we've decided to ignore it. However, compare that to Mr. Swinney, who's made zero statements about independence other than mentioning it as an aspiration. Mostly, Mr. Swinney is taken up with going around good causes and standing for the cameras with people who are already volunteering and doing things that are important for Scotland and basking in the reflected glory. But he's really not produced anything meaningful about how the SNP plans to approach the independence question or further the Scottish cause. Now, to be fair, as I said, Alba hasn't either. The Greens certainly aren't going to, despite the fact that Mr. Curtice says that they're going to get at least 13 seats based on current predictions, and he claims that Alba will get 7 seats according to current predictions. But again, it's all based on how many candidates each party stands and how the stupidly crazy arithmetic of the D'Hondt system actually pans out at the end. What's certain is that even if there is a massive pro-independence majority in Holyrood, with the SNP winning, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 seats, and Alba and the Greens winning, say, another 20 between them, which would produce a massive pro-independence majority, there's no plan. So without a plan, this majority is useless to us. And until these three parties actually talk to each other and formulate a common plan which says we all agree that if you vote for us and we get this outright majority, we will do X and Y to achieve independence. If the 2026 election, for example, was fought entirely on the basis of gaining independence only, and those three parties all agreed to that and worked for it in their own individual campaigns, even if they're separate, the agreement between the three that if they're elected and they form the majority government, they will take action to free Scotland from the United Kingdom. Now that might just take the form of negotiating independence immediately on getting that majority, because that is how countries free themselves from being colonies. They basically elect people who say that they're going to declare independence and then actually do that. And that's all it takes. It just takes all of those politicians to agree to do that, and it can happen. It's just a case of having enough courage to do it. I am certain that we would get a massive majority in the House at Holyrood next year if all the parties agreed to this common thread, and that they all said that we all agree that if we are elected in a majority together, all three of us, and we all end up forming a pro-independence majority, we will collectively then negotiate the end of the Union with the United Kingdom. And we will not hang around any longer. We know that there can't be another referendum because we know the United Kingdom won't allow it. Their Supreme Court has ruled it unlawful for Scotland to do that. So therefore, there is no other way of leaving the Union other than either taking to the streets with pitchforks and torches, which is very unlikely, or simply electing people who will free us from this colonial status. And that is really what we want to hear from leaders like Mr. McCaskill on Norrie Hunter's radio programme on Thursday. If Mr. McCaskill does make a statement like that, that would be fantastic, because if Alba is the first party to basically tie its colours to the mast and say, this is what we stand for, independence first and foremost, that is our primary manifesto pledge. If we're elected, we will action independence. Then we'll see whether the SNP has the bottle to do the same. We know also that the Independence for Scotland party, which is run by Colette Walker, has already said that they are first and foremost for independence. If Alba does the same, and the SNP were to follow suit, those three parties could generate a supermajority, enough of a supermajority. Say we got 55%, 60% of the population to vote for them based on the fact that they're going to declare independence. We could declare it, because that's what we voted for. And those politicians would need to come through on that or face electoral oblivion the next time they stand for election. That's what politics is about, after all. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. But remember, whatever Professor Curtice is saying today, take it with a big pinch of salt, because there are so many things that have to happen before his prediction can come true. And all of them depend on the three parties of independence, first of all, agreeing to a common strategy or a common goal, which they all agree they will work towards and not fight with each other on. And they also have to agree that once they have been elected, they will action that plan. That collective tripartite plan will be put into action, and the negotiations to end the Union will start immediately. That to me is the fastest, most efficient, and probably the most understandable proposition that you can make to the populace before an election. I'll leave you with that thought today. That's it from Inde-Car today. Please, if you can afford to, give to my crowdfunder. I'll put up another PayPal link shortly. There should be a PayPal link on some of my earlier videos, so if you'd like to donate to the channel, please do so. It keeps me going. It's also very important that you like and subscribe to the channel and comment on everything that happens on Inde-Car, because it drives the algorithm. More people see the show and it becomes more popular, and so on and so on. So if you value Inde-Car, please like and subscribe and share as widely as possible. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.